Qiang Jin Jiu. Book 3, Drunk in Wild Songs. Chapter 280, Exiled. Xiao Qiye woke up from his sleep. His arms, which he had rested his head on, had gone numb. He opened his eyes and stared at the tent for a while. He thought he had dreamt of the heavy downpour in Chu capital. Lu Guangbai lifted the tent flap and entered. Standing at the entrance wiping the damp sweat on his nape with a handkerchief, he said, "The falcons on patrol discovered Saker falcons in the areas towards the east. Gu Jin also found traces of passage from a horse caravan there. They are the convoy squad from the Hulu tribe." He set the handkerchief back into the copper basin to rinse it. Amuer refused to surrender. He means to fight to the death. Xiao Qiye stood up and bent his leg to prop up an arm. "It's nearing winter. The Hulu tribe can't graze sheep. This is the last of their food. Amuer's insistence on not making an appearance is because he's conserving his strength. He has seen through your intention to wait for him to play into your hand." Lu Guangbai hung up the handkerchief. "He's stalling for time. The Hulu tribe had exhausted their entire tribe's energy to supply to Hassan, and now they are supplying their entire tribe's provisions to Amuer. They would have to slaughter their own cattle and sheep if they wanted to survive this harsh winter. Amuer was already a spent force, like an arrow at the end of its flight, so what was he still waiting for?" With the tent flap at the entrance rolled up, Xiao Qiye stood up and bent over slightly to make his way out of the tent. He looked out at the endless sand dunes. Meng flew down from the flagpole and landed on the right arm Xiao Qiye had raised. "Amuer is a fine general," Xiao Qiye said, "but he's an even better politician." Amuer was a master at keeping the enemy in check. He opened up the north-south battlefield and formed the black and white scorpions all to better contain the enemy. He was already old and could no longer be as valiant as Hassan on the battlefields, but that did not mean that he was helpless in front of Xiao Qiye. Now that the game was as good as lost for him, there was only one way he could make Xiao Qiye withdraw his troops, and that was, to first crush Xiao Qiye's backing, Shenzhequan. The expression in Xiao Qiye's eyes was sharp and cutting as he looked back at Lu Guangbai and said, "He's waiting for news from Chu capital." Tantai, who seemed to have stirred up a hornet's nest with his words. Before he could dodge, his bun was slashed off by a scimitar that popped out. His black hair scattered apart, shortened by a large portion, and with the middle nearly bald. "Motherfucker!" Tantai, who grabbed up a handful of his short hair. "Colluding from the inside out. The real traitorous bastards are here." Raindrops splashed up along with the edges of the blades. Countless soldiers held their blades level before them and barged over to ram against each other's armors in the passageway. With a burst of strength, they advanced. Few of the motley crew of soldiers brought along their scimitars. This weapon was too conspicuous, so majority of them opted to carry their piked daggers beside their equipped blades. "The city gates have already been breached." Shenzhequan promptly came to a decision and snapped his folding fan shut. "Tell Xinwei that there are people from Biancha hiding in Chu capital. We have to enter even if we aren't inclined to." Fei Sheng did not dare to tarry. He threw away the sharp arrows and pointed out the incoming path to his subordinate at the same time he got on his horse. "Pass on his lordship's order." Sen Yu still had yet to lead the students back into the city when he saw someone ahead galloping into the camp and shouted towards the military tent, "There are Biancha soldiers hiding in Chu capital. The lives of the masses are at stake. Gao Zhongxiang, receive your orders." Gao Zhongxiang suddenly pushed aside the clutter of paper and grabbed his brush. Under the urgent sound of the torrential rain, he dipped the brush into the ink and waited with bated breath and rapt attention. "Heaven is helping his lordship." Yao Wenyu coughed at the window. As he gasped lightly for breath, he propped himself up and said to Gao Zhongxiang, "This move by Chu capital is tantamount to committing suicide. Shenwei's reputation as a traitor of the nation can be relinquished to someone more worthy now. Shenwei, His lordship is telling you to tell the world that the internal scourge is in Chu capital. The timing of the scorpion's arrival was simply too perfect. Just like Xiao Changbi, who previously mobilized his troops rashly, it gave Shen Zequan sufficient reason to act. The garrison troops could not kill living people when they attacked their way into the city, and it was tricky trying to deal with tens of thousands of a motley crew of soldiers, but once these soldiers turned into the scorpions, they were foreign foes. The foreign enemies stand before us, and the city gates have been breached. It's heavens will that a wise, enlightened sovereign with just cause should come spurring his horse on. Yao Wenyu covered his mouth, choking a few times as he coughed. Eventually, he held onto the edge of the bed for support and laughed out loud with some difficulty. The pawn who enters the game on the imperial court acts not of his own volition. The Grand Mentor is truly remarkable. We'll gladly accept this blade of regicide, Feng Quan. He raised his moist eyes and said in a hoarse voice as he looked at the heavy rain, Shui Yanqing has lost. Shui Ziaozuo won a game in the rainstorm and killed Qi Huilian, ousted Yao Wenyu, as well as drove Hai Lianji to his death. However, he was similarly constrained by the Wiki pieces. Lu Guangbai rebelled, Xiao Qiye returned to his wolf pack, and Shen Zequan stabilized and secured his hold on Zongbo. The so-called foolproof planning was all an illusion. He was forced to the brink of the precipice by his own self. He went to great lengths to find the scorpions, but he never expected the scorpions to be right beside him. Qi Huilian had suffered an unexpected setback before. Feng Quan did not understand. The intelligent ones would never repeat the same mistakes twice. The crown prince met his defeat at the hands of a traitor, so Qi Huilian would never let Shen Zequan fail again at the hands of a mole. The Eastern Palace had so many subordinates, so why did Qi Huilian have to choose the Xiao and Jiao clans? Because they were too conscience-stricken. Compared to the others who had been doing their best for the Eastern Palace from start to end, Xiao Changbi was a dead knot. He had never done a misdeed when he was under the Ministry of War, but because he was a sentimental man who greatly valued ties, he let his private affairs get in the way of his official duties. He bent over backward to save the Jiao clan, but Jiao Kanghai still died. He betrayed his former master of the Eastern Palace, yet he failed to save a single person and even lost his son in the process. This was just the beginning. At the very moment the case of the Zongbo troops' defeat broke out, Xiao Changbi made his own prison, becoming a prisoner of the word's conscience forever and ever. This blood debt surpassed all of Xiao Changbi's personal relationships, and for that reason, he could blind his own eyes, render himself mute with poison, and give out his own son. He kneeled before the Buddha statue and wept bitter tears, but Qi Huilian never used him. This was the most ruthless and most brilliant thing about Qi Huilian. When the Grand Mentor was alive, he did not use Xiao Changbi, and for every day that passed after his death, Xiao Changbi would fall even deeper into agony. This agony and guilt spurred on Xiao Changbi, and in turn, Xiao Changbi similarly spurred on Feng Quan. Feng Quan struggled to survive in the precipice in which he had fallen. No matter whose pawn he was, Qi Huilian dared to bet the shackles he had on him on the word father. Xiao Changbi was Feng Quan's lock, dead or alive. At that moment Feng Quan bade Xiao Changbi farewell. He had the razor pressed against the side of Xiao Changbi's neck, but he never did make the killing move. Shui Ziaozuo regarded people as his pawns, and Qi Huilian treated his pawns as people. He taught and guided Shen Zequan in the art of political power, on checks and balances back at the Temple of Penitence, controlling all weaknesses in terms of people's feelings. Shen Zequan opened his eyes and saw the end of the main east gate. Amidst the curtain of rain and snow, indistinct scenes of the past played out. Qi Huilian's figure still seemed to be standing there, his arms held high as he pulled on the chains, refusing to look back at Shen Zequan even in his last moments, when he tilted his head back and shouted, "Lanzo! Don't be afraid." Shen Zequan closed his eyes. When he opened them again, Feng Ta Shuangyi suddenly charged forth. Shen Zequan's sleeves and robes billowed amidst the pelting of the frost and snow, driving the blistering wind on both sides. He was like the icy glint of a blade about to return to its sheath amongst the dark clouds, bound to pierce through heaven and earth at this moment. He who has just cause is justified. The sudden thunderclap seemed to explode against his scalp. Luo Mu had already lost control over his motley crew of soldiers. He hastily retreated amidst the chaos of soldiers and shouted to the officials. The troops have turned renegade. The rain and snow were blinding. Shueziaozuo could not stand steady on his feet anymore. He stood atop the city wall with the court officials and watched as Shenzequan took the lead. The morale of the garrison troops was at an all-time high as they followed that figure in white forward, their momentum unstoppable. The Imperial Army at the south side gate encountered the capital command troops. They knew the alleyways of Chu capital even better than the capital command troops did, and when it came to fighting on the streets here, they were unrivaled. Blood splattered on the walls. Tavern banners and random booths tumbled over the ground along with the fighting and killing. Shenzequan urged his horse into the passageway, and stomped open the main gate of Chu capital from the front just as he wanted. At his side, Fei Sheng raised the Zongbo banner up high, while the garrison troops braved the rain of arrows from the top of the city wall and crossed into the territory one after another. The city is breached. A shrill, miserable wail rang out from the front of the Imperial Academy entrance. Following right after, several thousands of students cried aloud in unison amidst the spray of broken ice. Kong Qiu staggered forward, holding onto the battlement for support as he wept, "Oh, the 100-year reign of Great Zhou." The bronze bell at the summit of Mount Bodhi rang with a clang. The long, drawn-out toll of the bell stirred up a wave of wind, startling away the birds among the overlapping clouds. The city gate fell over with a thunderous crash. Countless denunciations and declarations of war tumbled in the air. Both of Shueziaozuo's cheeks were wet and cold. He looked up at the overcast clouds. The burden that had been imposed upon his shoulders all this time went up in smoke along with the collapse of the city gates. He raised his hand to wipe away the rainwater on his cheeks, having already heard the cries that had risen all around him. It has all come to an end. Shueziaozuo's eyes were like deadly still pools of deep water as he silently threw away his authority token. That token etched with the golden glory of the Li clan fell to the ground, where the hooves of horses passing by trampled it into pieces that tumbled separately into the puddles of mud. Tantai, who held up against the scimitar and pushed his opponent back into a retreat amid a flurry of footsteps. He abruptly swung his blade in a diagonal slash, and the sharp edge chafed against the scimitar and sliced off the other party's fingers. Tantai, who kicked over the other man and brandished his blade to split open a path paved in blood for Shenzequan. "Slay the enemies!" He shouted himself hoarse. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The blade of Qiao Tianya's sword pressed against the pads of his fingers. The rain outside the hall was still falling, but the wind had since stopped. Sheer white gauzes hung down to the ground. The small puddle at his feet reflected glints of the sword's edge. Feng Quan raised his finger and pushed over that last lamp. The opening of his sleeves brushed against that slightly bright flame. "You've become Shenzequan's blade, and now you're going to kill me." The lock of hair over Qiao Tianya's forehead hung down and blocked out the view of his eyes. He did not know if Feng Quan was crying or laughing, but the latter's shoulders shook as he hid in the darkness and clapped his palms lightly. Water droplets dripped along the lock of Qiao Tianya's hair onto the bridge of his nose. His sword was so fast that it left its sheath in the twinkling of an eye. At the first flash of the sword glint, the clang of metal against metal rang out as the sword struck away the iron needles that had come hurtling towards him. The clothes and hat officials stood behind the white gauze and raised an arm to pull off the hat on his head. There was only the sound of Feng Quan cackling in Mingli Hall. The clothes and hat official who had soundlessly materialized was just like a wraith locking eyes with Qiao Tianya across the white gauzes. The water droplet made a soft plop sound as it dropped to the ground. Qiao Tianya had already sprung up like a leopard flying into a sudden rage. All his unwillingness to take it lying down dissolved into the blade of the sword as it slashed through the sheer white gauzes and thrust forth with such force that the clothes and hat official retreated swiftly. The clothes and hat official hid his trump card in his narrow sleeves. As he raised his fingers, several silver threads lashed out in unison and nailed into the vermilion pillar while Qiao Tianya was dodging them. The man then kicked himself off the ground and flipped into the air, taking advantage of the silver threads to move as light as a swallow. Lamp oil dripped onto the ground, and the tongues of the flame licked the floor, blazing as they chased after Feng Quan's sleeves and robes. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Even if the garrison troops did not kill the commoners still fled in all directions in the pandemonium. The streets were so chaotic that Tan Taihu pushed and shoved against the commoners, fearing that the scorpions would take advantage of the situation and fish in troubled waters. Disperse the common people. Tan Taihu's palms were slick with blood. It was so slippery he could not hold his blade. But it was too late. The people blocking the streets crashed into the formation of the scorpions. It was so dark that they could hardly make out who the other party was. The scorpions, with scimitars in hand, killed the people and lifted the head to say in fluent Great Zhou tongue, his lordship said, "Slaughter everyone." In Chu capital. Fei Sheng lifted his torch and shouted as he galloped, "The Biancha Baldies have infiltrated the city. Luo Mu's soldiers are, in fact, rebels. Run if you don't want to die." How could the panicking common folks on the road hear Fei Sheng's voice? They crowded and jostled before the scorpions, and after some people dropped dead, they turned around and swarmed towards the garrison troops. This street was not spacious enough and a battering ram that had fallen over behind was also blocking the path. The swarming of the rushing crowd threw the garrison troops' formation into disarray. The scorpions were not wearing armor. They blended in with the common people running all over, and when they passed by the garrison troops, they unexpectedly threw out stabs. Over 10 of the garrison troops in front who were caught off guard promptly fell over. The Zongbo rebels are killing people. The commoners who cut a sorry sight fleeing for their lives covered their faces and wailed, trapped as they were with no way to advance or retreat. Under the overlapping shadows, they mistook the scorpions for the garrison troops, mistakenly thinking they were already surrounded by the garrison troops. For a moment, deafening cries reverberated through the sky. What a headache! Fei Sheng turned his horse around and returned to Shen Zequin's side. "Master, what should we do? Several main roads are all blocked." It was dark now. Banners on fire were everywhere burning in mid-air. The rain abated a little and those snowflakes also turned cotton-like and foam-like. Shen Zequin held the reins and looked towards the city wall. "Light up the watchtower. Force open the gate and sound the alarm. Have the Imperial Army who broke through the south side gate open up the street entrances." The garrison troops on both sides swiftly passed through. The arrows among the battlements were running low, and there were combats at close quarters everywhere at the foot of the city. The torches of the garrison troops abruptly lit up. Seizing the watchtower had become especially important. Shen Zequin carried a short blade on him. When his horse passed through the crowd, a gust of wind materialized at the side. He instantly dodged, and a piked dagger suddenly swiped past the side of his cheek. The wind trailing in its wake brushed against his cheek, carrying with it a slight chill. Shen Zequin's short blade suddenly left its sheath, and with a spin of his left hand, he struck away the piked dagger with a thud. However, his wounds had yet to heal, and this one blow merely knocked the scorpion's piked dagger askew. The scorpion promptly released his grip, and when the piked dagger dropped, he backhandedly grabbed it and thrust it horizontally at Shen Zequin's neck. The banner overhead suddenly burst into flames. Ashes all over the sky danced around his head. At the instant the banner burned, Shen Zequin flipped off his horse. Feng Ta Shuangyi got his intent and started running. Having already evaded the horizontal thrust, Shen Zequin feigned a few leaps with Feng Ta Shuangyi. The scorpion grabbed onto empty air. In the brief moment he was disoriented, Shen Zequin grabbed hold of the arm he had hit out with. The scorpion was stunned. Delight followed soon after, and he exclaimed in the Biancha tongue, "He has no strength." He had yet to finish his words when Shen Zequin released his hand. His left hand struck hard along the side of the scorpion's arm. The scorpion thought Shen Zequin was going to fling him over his shoulder, so he promptly spread a leg and prepared to stabilize his lower body, but Shen Zequin unexpectedly whirled around and kicked him right on the chest. The scorpion spread both arms and said in a booming voice, "Overrating your own strength like an ant trying to shake a tree." Two of Shen Zequin's long, slender fingers went aiming at an angle towards the center of the scorpion's brows. The scorpion suspected a trap and immediately closed his eyes. Shen Zequin, however, let out a very soft laugh. His short blade that had slipped from his hand fell downward. Putting his weight on one leg, he whirled around again and kicked the blade sideways at the scorpion. The scorpion, caught unprepared, took the short blade right in his lower abdomen. As a spray of blood splattered, he let loose a blood-curdling scream. Shen Zequin turned a deaf ear to it. The flame behind him abruptly flared bright. His figure elongated along with the movement of the blaze. Seeing his opportunity, Fei Sheng bellowed, "Luomu colluded with the Biancha people, and the foreign enemies are now in the city. The garrison troops are killing the enemies. The rest of you, get out of the way quickly." The torches on the watchtower at the east gate swayed against the sky. The garrison troop soldiers stepping on the railings held up their Zongbo authority token and shouted downward with all their might, "By order of his lordship, kill the foreign enemies. Kill the rebels. Kill the traitors." Seeing as their incitement was useless and that the passageways were all blocked tight by the garrison troops, the scorpions could only retreat to their original path. There was complete pandemonium in the entire Chu capital, and a total bloodbath ensued as the capital command troops, who were still fighting to the death making a last-ditch defense of the city gate, were slain by the imperial army. Most of the battlements had already collapsed. Xue Zaiozhuo's official robe was badly shredded and he cut a sorry sight until someone yanked him hard in an attempt to move him. Yair was holding Jin Jiu by the hand, and he had a cloth bundle slung over his shoulder. He gestured to Xue Zaiozhuo in the din, making ah sounds while dragging him towards the steps. Xue Zaiozhuo staggered a few steps. He braced himself against the wall and looked at Jin Jiu. Jin Jiu was Xue Zaiyi's son, whom Xue Zaiozhuo had kept by his side to raise. At present, the boy was so frightened that his face was awash in tears, yet he still held on to the corner of Xue Zaiozhuo's clothes and cried out as he held his tears back, "Uncle, uncle, uncle." Yair stomped his foot anxiously and kept tugging at Xue Zaiozhuo's official robe and motioning for Xue Zaiozhuo to run. Xue Zaiozhuo raised his hand to stroke Jin Jiu's cheek. "You're a good child," he said. Jin Jiu raised his head, feeling the rain on his cheeks. Xue Zaiozhuo hunched over and turned his back to the light, concealing all of his weaknesses. He only had this brief moment of interlude in this entire life of his. It was as if this was the only moment that belonged to him. Yair unwarrantedly started to cry. He shouted at Xue Zaiozhuo with all the strength he could muster and tugged at the ladder until his fingers were all red. Xue Zaiozhuo straightened up again and gently broke himself free of Yair's hold on him. He gave Yair a push on his shoulder and said, "Leave, both of you." Jin Jiu sobbed loudly and shouted as he pulled at Xue Zaiozhuo, "Uncle." Xue Zaiozhuo paid no heed to him. The rain tonight was less heavy than it was 2 years ago, but he saw the same dark and bleak sky. The lone traveler guarded the city. Long before the daylight was wiped off, he had heard the echoes of decay, but he really could not take it lying down. The behemoth that once towered here was going to take its leave of the stage in such a lonesome way. Xue Zaiozhuo slowly made his way down the steps. He walked in solitude, never looking back even once. "So it's due to you, Enjo," Xue Zaiozhuo halted in his tracks and said to Shen Zequin, "that you pushed hard for the census registries in Zongbo." Shenzhequan did not answer. In the dim shadows, Xue Zaizuo brushed off the dust on his sleeves. I held Qi Huilian in high esteem and embarked on the path he took. He gazed at Shenzhequan. But I wasn't as ruthless as him. It was all too easy to gamble on a life. The hard part was in daring to stake this life on the game. Qi Huilian dared to do anything, and the driving force behind his insane actions was his trust in Shenzhequan. Lanzhou was not his pawn. And it was precisely because of this that Qi Huilian left nothing behind for Lanzhou. Shenzhequan did not need restraints. Qi Huilian brushed the top of his hair before. In those 5 years of being together day and night, he had already pointed out the direction clearly for Lanzhou. Teacher shall teach you the classics, and bestow upon you the courtesy name Lanzhou. This was everything Qi Huilian had. Great Zhou has been through the era of the heroes. For hundreds of years, even the foreign powers have not been able to breach through this gate, and now, it's lost to you. Xue Zaizuo gazed at Shenzhequan. A person whose fate is sealed, much like a fish swimming at the bottom of the cauldron. I have heard plenty of speculations, and even Yuan Zhou has fantasized that I was perhaps a descendant with the Li's bloodline that Shen Wei kept hidden. Shenzhequan turned his eyes to look at the palace. But I am the son of a subject guilty of a crime. The whole world scrambles over one another for the imperial heir. Only Mr. did the exact opposite. He who has just cause is not preordained by heaven. Qi Huilian turned the tides with his own strength, and for that, I admire him. Xue Zaizuo exhaled deeply and continued in a heavy voice, my sovereign is young, and so is the Xue Zaizuo, who has come to surrender today. The city gates are already breached and the public roads, opened. Shenzhequan, do not kill the innocents, I will come to receive you. His voice was like a clap of thunder, so sudden and deafening that the officials at the top of the city wall were all paralyzed. Opening the gates to surrender was a humiliation and a disgrace for all eternity, and now, Xue Yanqing, alone had shouldered it. No, Kong Qiu cried out in anguish and beat his chest in sorrow, oh, great Zhou. The court officials mutually held each other in support in inconsolable grief, as if mourning the loss of a parent. A surrender meant that the war would cease. The remaining garrison troops of Zhongbo no longer need to advance further. The fact that the 13 cities of Juexi behind Chu capital could still remain unharmed even though Chu capital was breached was a testament to the painstaking effort of the proactive faction over several years. They were also the last remaining granary of Great Zhou. Kong Qiu understood. This was the last wise policy. They were completely wiped out in this game of Wiki with Zhongbo, and with this one reception by Xue Zaizuo, Great Zhou would thus cease to exist. Kong Qiu was about to sag to the ground. He clung onto the battlement, his aged face awash in tears. The change of sovereignty today is all down to our incompetence. He tilted his head back to look at the flurry of cotton snow in the sky tangling with the official denunciation and declaration of war. Gradually, a resolute expression came over his face. Shenzhequan knew it did not bode well when he saw the change in Kong Qiu's expression. The dark, gloomy canopy of the heavens covered up the clouds and moon from view. Raindrops tumbled and splashed. Sure enough, Kong Qiu held his head high and bellowed, I am a subject of Great Zhou, and I will not kneel to a second master. With that, his official robe fluttered, and he made to leap off the city wall to die for his nation. Oh no, Fei Sheng inwardly cursed in alarm. Xue Zaizuo might have surrendered and received the new sovereign, but he still had yet to hand over the Great Zhou's imperial jade seal. If the news that Kong Qiu leapt to his death were to spread to tomorrow, the narrative would be twisted such that Shenzhequan was the one who forced him into doing so. Stop him! Fei Sheng shouted to the garrison troops who had attacked their way up the city wall. The officials crowded around Kong Qiu. No matter how fast the garrison troops were, they could not push away the crowd. All they saw was Kong Qiu's official robe billowing in the wind. His body was already leaning over the battlement. Right at this critical juncture, a figure suddenly pounced from behind and grabbed hold of Kong Qiu's official robe. "Grand Secretary, you mustn't!" Liang Qiushan cried out involuntarily. Kong Qiu's figure lurched to a pause, chafing off the broken bricks on the top of the city wall. He held his arms and started coughing in between wails. Liang Qiushan was sweating profusely as he dragged Kong Qiu back. Both of his arms were trembling. He was badly shaken and his face, through the dark night and flames, was drenched in sweat. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The horse carriage was attacked on its way to the main west gate. All the various street entrances were packed with carriages and horses. The rich and people of nobilities packed up their possessions, wanting to make use of the chaos to make their escape through the main west gate and thus completely blocking this particular road. The guards pulled the reins and brandished their whips to chase away the commoners as they bellowed, "Move away! Get out of the way!" The carriages and horses at the side came barging over, and startled shouts of alarm promptly rose. There were so many people that it was like a mush of mixed gruel in a pot. There was no way the horse carriage could get any closer. The curtain of the carriage swayed. Li Jianting saw the towering palace and heard the toll of the bronze bell. The city's been breached. Han Jin ran barefoot through the streets. He jumped and grabbed at the declarations fluttering all over in the air and burst out laughing like a deranged man. The city's been breached. Shueziaozuo surrendered. Someone cried bitterly with his head to the sky. Great Zhou has perished. Li Jianting felt an acute stab of pain in her chest. Her trembling fingers lifted the carriage curtain open. Amidst her urgent gasps for breath, she suddenly leaned forward and started throwing up. The strong wind blew against her disheveled hair, and the drizzle masked her face. Bones indistinctly protruded from her heaving back. The last leg of the journey Shueziaozuo spoke of was to suffer the humiliation on her behalf. Li Jianting's body also started trembling. The chill penetrated deep into her bones, and she laughed in a raspy voice. She and Shueziaozuo mutually complimented each other, but they did not have even a smidgen of mentor-disciple bond. Shueziaozuo had no need for it, and so did Li Jianting. Even up to this moment, Shueziaozuo was still doing what he was as a subject. Zhang Qingshan did not return, so even if Li Jianting fled to Juexi, she would merely be struggling to drag out an ignoble existence. Great Zhou had already perished. Shenzhequan not only possessed a powerful army but also the public's trust. All the painstaking efforts they had made in the 8 cities were handed over on a silver platter to Shenzhequan. Those unfinished matters they had yet to work on would become Shenzhequan's badges of honor after tonight. Dragging out an ignoble existence for the remainder of my life, fleeing and hiding left and right. Li Jianting raised her eyes and looked at the rain. How dull. Li Jianting had spent half of her life hiding. Her fate was that of a life which could never see the light. But she did her utmost to struggle. She knew where she stood amongst the victors and the losers. She was defeated, and to that, she conceded. Your Maj the guard could not maintain his grip on the reins as he watched Li Jianting leap off. Soaking in the rain, Li Jianting lifted her arm to tie up her loose hair. Tens of thousands of people were fleeing to the west. Only she alone headed east, becoming the lone figure going against the current of the tide of people. Han Jin grasped the declaration in his hand as he danced and sang merrily among the tidal surge of people. He pranced joyfully and caught up with Li Jianting. He grinned, I'm looking for my eldest brother. Mingli Hall blazed with flames. Li Jianting bent over and picked up a broken drum that had fallen on the road. She tapped it, and the muffled beats of the drum rang out. Are you going to the palace? Han Jin clapped his hands and answered, yes, yes, yes. Troops thrown into disarray fought desperately to the death. Li Jianting no longer looked at anyone. She struck that broken drum and laughed out loud without a care together with the madman, striding in the direction of the palace as she raised her voice. Exiled subject I was of yesteryear, a hero too in a turbulent era. Of the learned the sage beckons, into my trap the talented walk. Amidst the backdrop of the bleak, lightless sky, Kong Qiu and the other court officials shed tears atop the city wall. Hark, the nomad flutes at the pass of Xiao, there goes armored hooves through waters cold. Into war the veteran general spurs his horse, his military gear heavy in the blizzard storm. At the stone monument of Libei that had stood erect for a spring and an autumn, a thin veil of snow blanketed Xiao Fangxiu's saber. Among the withered grass, the armored cavalry galloped. Xiao Jiming dismounted his horse and lowered his hand to wipe away the remnants of snow for the blade. Where mountain snow meets starburst glints, of rapacious eagles, the ruthless wolf slays. The billowing waves of the Hashi River churned, as the withered flower of Chidi vanished under the long stream of the current. Blade thus sheathed, he dusts his sleeves, scarlet tassel stark against clouds carefree. With his wine, the ailing immortal roams. Moon over pines, still of zither strings. Yao Wenyu leaned over and coughed, and once again, his handkerchief was stained red with blood. He gazed out of the tent, his vision obstructed by the heavy fog. Qiao Tianya's sword had already returned to its sheath. Amidst the fire and the pounding of the rain, he looked at Feng Quan. In the ceremonial hall the merry feast starts, cups and chopsticks clink, we toast and drink. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Li Jianting struck the broken drum as she threaded her way within the vermilion city walls. Relish the wine to the last of its drop, of revelry we indulged within lofty palace walls. The fire in Mingli Hall soared into the sky, brightly illuminating the surroundings. A blazing sea of flames lay right ahead. Han Jin ran with his arms raised, while Li Jianting turned her head back to take another look at Chu capital. Her fingers tapped lightly against the drum, but the drum no longer made a sound. She looked to be in a trance amidst the raging flames as she finished in a hoarse voice. Intoxicated we fall amidst rapturous songs, where honor and rank need matter not. The lacquered pillars of Mingli Hall collapsed with a thunderous crash and splashed forth a wave of fire. The ambers splatter onto the hem of Li Jianting's skirt and burn along the decorative patterns. She turned around, and the raging fire engulfed her whole. End chapter. Qiang Jin Jiu. Book 3, Drunk in Wild Songs. Chapter 281, Wolf and Eagle. When dawn broke, the sound of killing in the city had already stopped. As it had just rained, there were no ashes and dust floating in the air. More than half of the palace was burned down. Shenzequan stepped over the ruins and all he could see were crumbling walls and debris. Arson within the palace, Fei Sheng lamented as he followed at Shenzequan's side. Mingli Hall was burned to ashes. The female emperor did not surrender and gave her life for her country, Shenzequan said. The name Emperor Shenjian ought to be recorded on the annals of Great Zhou. Fei Sheng had been longing to return to Chu capital, and now that he had really returned, the sights he saw everywhere were all unfamiliar. It was not as exhilarating as it was in Zongbo. He held his blade and pushed aside the rubble ahead for Shenzequan. She was a woman of integrity and principles. Tell Yu Jing, Minchen, and Cheng Feng to stand by for order. Shenzequan stopped in his tracks. Have Sanjiao returned already? Fei Sheng looked in the direction of Mingli Hall and answered after a moment of hesitation. He's back. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Qiao Tianya was in the middle of washing his hands. His 10 fingers were submerged in the copper basin, dispersing wispy tendrils of red in the water. His sword was still by the side of his waist, but its hilt was so red all over that its original color was no longer discernible. The scorpions in the various areas have already been executed. There are a total of 147 of them, with the majority being eunuchs. Ji Qingqing flipped through the eunuchs' authority tokens. The leader is Feng Quan, who came to take Pan Rugui's place after the 8th year of the Xian era. That's a lot, Zhou Gui said with horror. Seeing Zhou Gui's face go pale, Ji Qingqing could not help but comfort him. Chu capital is already secured by us now. Your Excellency doesn't have to worry. While they were speaking, Qiao Tianya had already washed his hands clean. He lifted the hanging screen at the door and went down the steps while the sky was still not fully bright. If Feng Quan could have been captured alive. Kong Ling soundlessly waved his hand, and Yu Xiaozhe abruptly stopped what he was going to say. Looking at the still swinging hanging screen, Kong Ling whispered, "Report it as it is to his lordship." Before Jiao Tianya made his way to the tent, he heard Yao Wenyu coughing. He stood at the entrance and raised his hand, but he did not lift the tent flap. Yao Wenyu folded the handkerchief, put it back into his sleeves, and said in an unhurried voice, "His lordship isn't back yet. Come in." Jiao Tianya bent over at the waist to enter. The brazier had already gone out and it was a little cold inside the tent. Yao Wenyu was cloaked in his overcoat as he sat on the bed with a brush still in his hand. After Jiao Tianya entered, he pushed aside the small table. Jiao Tianya took off his boots by the bed against that bit of morning light. He sagged down in silence, trapped in the cramped and narrow empty space between the bed and the small table, then he rested his head on Yao Wenyu's lap. The medicinal scent on Yao Wenyu enveloped Jiao Tianya. He closed his eyes, as if he was sleeping in a time that had long gone by. Yao Wenyu covered the hilt of the sword with one hand and covered Jiao Tianya with the other. His wide sleeves spread out all over the bed. In that minuscule bit of morning light, he lowered his head and looked at Jiao Tianya. The incense on the table masked the smell of blood that both belonged to Yao Wenyu and Jiao Tianya. "I have a courtyard on Mount Bodhi," Yao Wenyu gently stroked Jiao Tianya's hair, "where you can watch the rays of the morning sun at daybreak, and the river of stars formed by the lights of households in Chu capital after sunset." Jiao Tianya seemed to be able to see it. Yao Wenyu turned his head slightly to look at the thin sheet of window paper. "The snow is here." The snowflakes outside the window danced gracefully in the air. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Amuir had a gemstone secured before his forehead, and a simple and unsophisticated scimitar affixed at his waist. He bent his tall and powerfully built body over and helped Duo Erlin to pick up the Chidi silk flower. He spread his palm open. The silk flower looked just like the real thing. This was something Hassan once brought back from the borders of Qidong. "My good lass," Amuir said, "follow your father back to the oasis." Duo Erlin took the silk flower with both hands and shook her head. "I'm Hassan's wife. I want to defend my heroic eagle's father for him. His father is not old yet." Amuir straightened up and smiled widely in the evening glow of the setting sun. "Fighting battles is a man's business. You allowed me to possess Suh Bashao's bear warriors. You have already done a lot for the Hanshi tribe. My good lass, you silly girl, you're not only Hassan's wife, but also the mother of his child. The precious pearl of the grasslands should be riding her horse on the shores of Lake Chidi. The yellow sand of the desert here doesn't suit you. Go back." Duo Erlin's shoulders shook as she forced herself to hold back her tears, but her face still ended up wet. Holding the silk flower, she sobbed and asked, "I heard the bungle call of the king of wolves. I smelled his butcher's blade." Amuir lowered his large palm and placed it on the center of Duo Erlin's head, covering it. "When I was born together with Xiao Fangxiu in the bosom of the Hanjian Mountains, the Hanshi tribe was destined to fight it out with Libei until one of us became the victor. In the decades of war, we have each lost our brothers and sent out our own sons." His weathered face, of having been through the vicissitudes of life, was overlaid with golden light. The sunset glow was so dazzling that it was as if it could contend with the morning sun. No news came from Chu capital, which meant that Amuir no longer had the advantage within Great Zhou. He missed too many opportunities. Without Hassan and without the Zongbo supply line, the Hanshi tribe's future was all too obvious. My heroic eagle flew over the snow-capped peaks of Libei. His father will not back down before the blade of the new king of wolves either. We are a strong tribe among the 12 tribes, and this strong tribe has the hero. We only have heroes who die in battles, not cowards who beat a retreat. Bayan and the old wise one stood outside the golden tent. The old wise one's palms were all creased with wrinkles as he rubbed open the withered and yellow stalks of grasses and gazed at the setting sun out in the far distance. Clutching his precious book, Bayan asked, "Teacher, will we win?" The old wise one did not answer. When Hassan left, he had also kneeled in the waters of the Hashi River and asked him the same question, "Will I win?" He let the wind blow the grass in his palm away into the distance. The old wise one's snow-white beard and hair fluttered slightly in the wind. He looked at that orb of setting sun in silence until the dome of heaven darkened. "The wolf is here." So said the old wise man. The strong wind swept across the rolling mounds, and yellow sand brushed against armors. With one hand supporting his blade, the young king of wolves slowly rose to his feet, firmly commanding everyone's line of sight. The setting sun vanished behind his back, replaced by innumerable armored cavalry soldiers. Meng stood on Xiao Qi's shoulder. Its sharp, penetrating gaze piercing through the gale, where it fixated on the spot ahead together with its master. Lang Tao Shuijing galloped forth from behind and did not stop. Xiao Qi flipped onto the horse, and Meng flapped its wings to follow by Xiao Qi's side. Xiao Qi led the armored hooves of his army, stomping on the yellow sands as they charged down in an assault like the boundless dark clouds shrouding the night. ******. Bayan saw Duo Erlin off. He stood by the horse carriage and gave his treasured book to Duo Erlin. "I can't read Great Zhou characters," Duo Erlin said. "Keep it for yourself." Bayan was persistent on placing the book beside Duo Erlin's knees. "A gift for the little eagle." Duo Erlin covered her stomach. The flocks of sheep behind the horse carriage kept bleating incessantly. Holding onto the horse carriage, she looked at the clusters of tents and said, "The moon tonight is too bright." Bayan thought Duo Erlin was worried that the return journey would be a hard one to make, so he flashed a smile and reassured her, "The hero has already informed the tribes along the way. With the warriors from the Qiang tribe with you, no one will dare to hurt you." There was no hint of a smile on Duo Erlin's face. She was just like a flower in the midst of wilting. Bayan could not figure out what she was thinking. Even if he had become a wise man, he was still a silly lad. Bayan felt around his wizened pouch and found an old brush. He set this brush by Duo Erlin's knees too. Maintaining the smile on his tanned face, he said, "Next year, when you've safely given birth to the little eagle, the hero will bring you back. When that time comes, you will be the most honorable woman in the desert." Some of the 6 tribes had turned traitor and sided with Xiao Qi. The Hanshi tribe's status as the ruler of the desert was already an empty title that existed in name only. Bayan's clumsy attempt at comfort could not hide a single thing. But this time, Duo Erlin made an effort to curve her eyes into crescents. As if she believed Bayan's words, she said, "If it's a boy, I'll hand him over to you to teach and guide. As for this book, I'll return it to you when that day comes." Bayan scratched the back of his head rather awkwardly and said, "If it's a boy, he will surely be as outstanding as the heroic eagle. He'd be the best lad of all in the desert. It'd be better to ask my teacher and the hero to teach and guide him." He smiled again. "Go, Duo Erlin. Your father is still waiting for you." The folks of the Hulu tribe herded the flock of sheep. These were their last remaining sheep, and they wanted to send them back to the oasis before the weather got worse. There were not that many warriors from the Qiang tribe, but their bare horses stood out among the ponies, and because they were carrying their sabers with them, they appeared all the more valiant and fearsome. The Hulu tribe was familiar with the sandy desert routes. The man in the lead drove the horse forward, and the copper bell hung high on the banner tinkled. Amidst the rocking of the horse carriage, Duo Erlin waved to Bayan. Bayan chased a few steps after her and mustered up the courage to shout, "Duo Erlin!" Duo Erlin pushed aside the hanging screen of the carriage and looked at him. Bayan stopped in his tracks and stood in place, waving his hand again without saying a word. The pitch-dark sky enveloped the desert. A saker falcon in the wind hovered over the Hongyiang flag, which flapped noisily in the wind as the tinkling of the copper bell receded further and further into the distance. Bayan clenched his empty hands tightly into fists and chanted in silence for victory without retracting his gaze. The moonlight was flimsy as it paved the path underfoot, looking as if it took just one step for it to break. Horses' hooves sank into it and abruptly departed. The old wise one tossed the withered branch he used for divination in his lap. Putting his palms together, he lowered his head and silently evoked the heavenly god of cheating. Bayan finally turned around and ran towards the old wise man, shouting, "Teach." Before the Saker falcon above the Hongying banner could react, a gerfalcon swiftly swooped down and suddenly tore it apart. Grabbing the Saker falcon's remnants, Meng flapped its wings in midair and ripped off the Saker falcon's feathers. It all happened so quickly that Bayan was not able to snap out of his shock. The din of feasting and drinking among the tents had yet to stop. Wolves. The Hanshi tribe cavalry soldier on night patrol sped across the sands and did all he could to shout himself hoarse in the Biancha tongue. Surprise attack. A long blade came sliding out with a swish as heavy armor knocked over the cavalryman directly from behind. The pony was totally powerless in the face of the tidal wave of steel and iron, and in the blink of an eye, it was completely engulfed. Bayan stood stupefied in place. The Libe armored cavalry should have only just passed Mozanchuan. The news was that Xiao Qiye intended to block the exit of Mozanchuan, and his main forces had yet to arrive here, but the shocking turn of events unfolding before his eyes made it clear that Xiao Qiye had not only come, but he had also chosen the most direct way of doing it. Xiao Qiye, Bayan whipped his head back and hollered, "The armored cavalry has launched a surprise attack." Armored hooves trampled over the wooden-made fence at the very edge. Too late to get onto their horses, the Biancha warriors who emerged from the tents met the armored cavalry head-on with their scimitars in hand. Xiao Qiye's longly blade was a heavy beast. Coupled with his extraordinary arm strength, he was practically unrivaled when he cleaved and hacked. Lang Tao Shuijin was the first to charge amongst the Hanshi tribe's tents. Several splatters of fresh blood sprayed in between each lift of his blade. Heads tumbled to a stop at Bayan's feet. Bayan's throat choked up, seized as he already was with terror. Amidst the glares of blade and glints of swords, he saw the eyes of a ravenous wolf. An eye for an eye. Bayan hastily stepped back and almost fell. Gasping lightly for breath, Xiao Qiye raised the arm that was holding the blade and rubbed the blood off his cheek with the back of his hand. The smile gradually materializing on his face spoke of extreme danger. After months of enduring the rigors of a long, arduous journey, he finally arrived at his destination. Amidst the sprays of blood and dancing flames, Xiao Qiye tilted his head back and demanded in a voice as cold as ice, "Where is he?" The flap of the golden tent lifted open, and a cold glint glided along the edge of the old scimitar in the moonlight. Amuir bent at the waist to make his way out of the golden tent. His equally strapping tall figure obscured the sand and dust beneath his feet, as if he was also the stabilizing force of the Hanshi tribe. Saker falcon surrounded Meng, who was hovering alone on its own. Xiao Qiye shook off the blood on his blade and heard the beats of the war drums. End chapter.